can't really be a shy teacher. And so if anything, that comfort has probably, I don't know, lended some kind of clarity or comfort, and more comfort in putting my work out into the world, and by extension myself out into the world, just from being around the students and interacting with them. It's certainly, made me more comfortable when I teach, occasionally classes at the Modern here in Fort Worth, or the DMA, and those kind of social interactions and stuff. So that side of my practice was probably benefited from my kind of comfort with just being a teacher and interacting with people.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you're an undergrad, you're coming out of graduate school, and you're trying to find traction in the art market, where did you first find success? Like what were the things that you needed to do, or what things did you do that paid dividends in terms of getting the shows and developing the relationships that you needed to develop?
Well, the installation work I was doing was well received by people, and did shows in Austin and Houston, and then in Abilene, I was part of a group show at the Grace Museum out there in Abilene, and that was actually the first place I met Cris Worley, who now represents me. And so, anyways, that, doing that work got me out there and meeting people, of course, but I also was aware that no one buys that kind of work and stuff, or very rarely, should I say, does someone buy an installation. And at first, like when I was a graduate student, that was I was making actually installations for that reason, that I felt like I wasn't making it a commodity, and I thought that was, I was all about that. And then though, I was like no longer a student and poor, and I was like, well, it'd be nice to make some money off of make a living off this somehow. Right. And so I did become more conscious of that when I'm, making the paintings I make now, and trying to have this balance actually between scratching the itch of making installations and making things that at least can support the habit, so to speak, of making work. And anyway, so yeah, I mean, when I was at 500X Gallery in Dallas, I was a member there for a few years. I did use that. By and large, that work there was when I was kind of transitioning back into making kind of paintings and drawings, and meeting people. I think that's actually where Cris saw my work again since the show in Abilene, and where I'd first was showing the kind of early crumpled paintings that I was doing, and she invited me to be in a group show with her, and then it's just kind of gone from there. Yeah. So it's like where I'm currently at, where it's of course, I mean, I love working with Cris, and she's wonderful, and so yeah, I'm at this what I think is a nice, well, sometimes it's a nice spot where I can do paintings and my installation stuff, but then it does, like, there's a whole nother element though now where I'm like, I have to be conscious of that there are or I'm overly conscious maybe sometimes. It's like, oh, there's a gallery, and then people buy paintings more than they buy installations or whatever, and so sometimes that can be a stumbling thing where it can maybe hold back, where that's like in the back of my head where it's like, well, what am I going to do with this installation or whatever, and so it's still I don't know, it goes back and forth, I guess.
Sure. Well, there's those, there's this whole notion of being an installation, but it seems like, your work is so sculptural, and your installations kind of are along those lines. And so have you thought any about going even more towards sculpture, or going from relief to something that's full-blown 3D?
So on one hand, I always was firmly kind of committed to my work, always pointing to drawing or to painting, no matter how kind of sculptural installation it became. And so there's been like a couple ideas for works I've had that would be more sculptural. Mm-hmm. I've never gone as far as executing them. I've had, and again, this is one of those things where it's like, over the summer I'm going to do this thing, and I just haven't done it yet. But mm-hmm. I've had these ideas for actually doing the cutout drawings, but wanting to do them in metal and kind of bend them and make them like a thing in space. Mm-hmm. And so anyways, I've thought about that a few times, but I haven't gone as far as making it yet. And who knows if I will or not. I haven't, for whatever reason, I've always had a reluctance to like wanting to go fully into sculpture.
Right.
But maybe I will.
No, I mean, yeah. I don't mean to be the guy who comes in and like, throws something into your creative process, but I look at something like, this grid piece that is really well crumpled there, and I start thinking about, well, what if it just became, something, that was, came off the wall and was, basically you take your flat grid and you make a form out of it.
Right. Yeah. And again, like, I've had these thoughts before. We'll see. I mean, and that's where like the furniture things were becoming these kind of things in space. And that those are the kind of conversations that, again, when I have a conversation with someone who's like brand new to me and brand new to the work, where it is like, oh, well, why don't you try out this material or that material or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, I should. And then I write, I have my sketchbooks, I feel like, are just collections of notes that I write down and then never go back and look at.
Well,
again.
Right, and some of those things can be distractions too. Yeah, and so you have to have a pretty good filter to filter out people's bad advice.
Yeah.
So please filter out my bad advice. It's not even advice. I'm just looking at your work, and it's in a way it's sort of inspirational, in terms of that I can see where you can go, and you've created a diverse amount of stuff here that you can go in a number of directions. Right. Yeah. I think ultimately that's what we hope for, mm-hmm. right? Because that kind of reassures us that we're not going to hit a roadblock and just kind of stop in our tracks and say what's next.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And while my work hasn't, like I said, I don't think I ever take these like dramatic turns in my work, but I get bored somewhat quickly, which is where like suddenly I'm making flat paintings again, and it's already like, oh, I'll do a few of these. The crumpled paintings I really feel like are the longest, kind of most consistent thing that I've done, though formally they've changed where they've gotten more colorful and the imagery has gotten a little bit more complex. But then it's like, oh, now I'm gonna go do these flat paintings, and it's mm-hmm. Not to say there's anything wrong, I guess, with the artists who work in a very kind of consistent way, that I do try to kind of leave options and go down different avenues.
It's funny. Some of your grid crumple paintings, I don't know if it's something about the shapes and the colors, but they remind me of some of this early computer animation in the 80s, where they were trying to do on-screen graphics of there was a specific palette, this Miami Vice sort mm-hmm. of palette mm-hmm. from the 80s, and things they were trying to do with computer animation that kind of, they wanted to tell you, they were trying to intentionally tell you that there's 3D going on by having some sort of grid in there, and something about it all kind of reminds me of your work. And those.
Interesting. I'm certainly, I guess, aware of that kind of aesthetic that you're talking about. Growing up in the 80s, perhaps that stuff it's
in your DNA.
It's in there somewhere. It's not. I can't say I'm actively channeling that stuff. Yeah,
right.
But no, that's really interesting. To hear that, and maybe now I'll be more conscious of mining things from the 80s, and
But the first time I ran into you was at the DMA, where you were doing, I think it was part of your residency. You were there on a Saturday morning with remote controlled cars and markers. Mm-hmm. So what was going on there?
So I'm still in the midst of the residency, the kind of in the education department at the DMA, and so they've given me a lot of different opportunities to work with different age groups, and for either hands-on activities or lectures or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so they wanted me to participate in making like a drawing activity, and so I'm not used to. I'm a college professor, and I'm usually like very. I was always very specific. Actually, it's one reason why I wanted to get my MFA was that I never had a desire to teach younger groups.
Right.
I'm just comfortable working with older people. And anyway, so I was like, well, what kind of activity can I do that kids will enjoy, and is playful? And I'd seen these like drawing bot things, these kind of self-moving little contraptions or whatever that. Make drawings. And so I was like, that's an interesting idea, but it's like, how do I make something that's a little bit more interactive? And then I was just like, I'll just get a remote control car and just tape some markers to it. And I was like, and even if the kids don't like the drawings they end up with, like, surely they'll enjoy just driving a remote control car around.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's just kind of where that came from. And they seemed to respond well to it. It was a learning experience for me, because again, I'm not age groups I don't typically work with, and then and that's one thing about this. One of the reasons I applied for the residency at the DMA, and I've said yes to as many of the kind of the opportunities they've offered me as part of the residency, is because I did want to. I am trying to broaden my my experience as a teacher and the age groups that I work with, and to make me maybe just to see how that stuff can impact me as a professor down in Tarleton, and and vice versa. But to force myself to work in new ways,
So one other question that was, tell me about Homecoming. I see that on your Homecoming Collective. I see that on your bio. What,
yes.
Was that here in Fort Worth?
Yeah.
And so what?
Yeah. Homecoming Committee. That was the collective. Okay. That was our full name. I guess we formed in 2011. We all were. I had just graduated from TCU. A few of them were at TCU at the time. And we were active, though, from 2011 to 2015-ish.
Okay.
There was like a core group of probably 8 of us, just off the top of my head, maybe 8 of us who were there the entire time, and then a few others who kind of were in and out at various time periods there. And we did, maybe a couple projects a year for that kind of 4-year time period. These kind of relational, interactive, sometimes performative events.
Okay.
And we were pretty active. We were part of a group show at the Dallas Museum of Art at one point. We were in the 2013 Texas Biennial, which had us do a residency actually at Central Track when Central Track was still a thing, down in Expo Park. Right.